So Among Us is a thing, as if you didn't already know. Among Us has been blowing up the internet for the past 6 months or so, and I'd be truly surprised if you had not heard of it. The game itself is really simplistic and could even be called repetitive. It's essentially a series of tasks, each of which could easily make up the entirety of a shitty mobile game all on its own. All connected by a sci-fi themed hub world that you travel around to get from task to task. The game doesn't have a story to keep you engaged, and there's no forward momentum or progression apart from attempting to complete the menial tasks, which will reset after each round is done. And yet still, this game has blown up. Everyone is playing it, and when I first heard about the game, I was skeptical. I mean, the art style was appealing in its simplicity, but the menial and repetitive tasks forcibly reminded me of the aforementioned shitty mobile games. I was uninterested in playing for a long time. I like video games with stories and character arcs and big thematic themes that I can dissect in order to get my scholarly masturbation on in YouTube videos, and Among Us was just not that kind of video game. But then Nate actually invited me to play it, and I had a great time. But here's the rub. I was right about Among Us. Kind of. Among Us isn't really my kind of video game because it's not really a video game at all. I mean, obviously it's a video game, but it does some very unique things that set it apart. It's unassuming art, simple concept, intuitive gameplay, and the fact that the best part of the game isn't even in the game. All of these things lead into what I think makes this game so successful, and so today, I want to talk about Among Us. The game was initially released in 2018 by a small game development company called Innersloth, which is made up of 3 people, Forrest Willard, Marcus Bromander, and Amy Leo. The game was initially released under the name Space Mafia as a reference to the game's sci-fi theme and its similarity to the live-action party game Mafia. If you've never heard of Mafia, then it's very much like werewolves. And if you've never heard of werewolves or Mafia, then I can't help you. Among Us was intended to be a mobile-only game and initially used maps from Innersloth's previous game. In its early release, the game was not particularly popular, but the developers stuck with it because of very vocal support from a dedicated fanbase. When 2020 hit, the game surged in popularity, mostly in South Korea before making its way to Brazil and then the rest of the world. Now Among Us isn't just big, but monolithic in its popularity. It has become a household name and is fast becoming the go-to pastime when connecting with friends. As I mentioned, the first time I played was with Nate and his whole family, and I mean his whole family. That means there was Nate, myself, plus Nate's partner, his younger brother, his younger sister, her husband, Nate's dad, and even his mom was getting into it at one point. I think this is in no small part due to the appeal of the art style. The art is sci-fi themed, obviously, but it's a little cartoony with its primary colors and astronaut people. There's something very endearing about these little dudes and how they walk. And you can customize them with costumes and hats. I like to wear a lab coat because I think I'm smart, and a plunger because I have poop for brains. The only problem I have with this is the microtransactions, but the game is free, so I guess I won't complain that much. Even the way player characters are murdered is a bit comedic, and then the dead body just has one cartoon bone sticking out of it, which makes them look like chicken wings. This is brilliant, as pushing too far into the sci-fi aesthetic may have made the game more horror-like and isolating, which would be scary. Leaning into the horror may have made a gorier, more sinister game, but it also wouldn't have the same universal appeal. So not only was this my first time playing, but it was also Nate's parents' first time playing. The art direction was universal, so it was easy to get into that way, but the game itself is also accessible because of the simplicity in premise and in gameplay. I call it a premise, but there really isn't a story, mainly just a basic concept or plot conceit. You and a group of 4 to 10 strangers or friends are placed on a base or spaceship and must complete tasks to get all the systems operational. The problem is that 1 or 2 of the crewmates is an imposter, whose goal is to sabotage, murder, and do everything in their power to fuck over the other crewmates in an attempt to kill them all. But no one else knows who the imposters are. And that's it. And there doesn't need to be anything more than that because immediately you're moved into gameplay. The crewmates go about completing menial, repetitive, and monotonous tasks to get systems operating while the imposter attempts to kill them off one by one without getting caught. When a body is found or when a person presses the emergency meeting button, the crewmates then get the chance to vote and cast out someone in the hopes of purging the imposter. In gaming, there's something called a gameplay loop, and I have heard this split into 3 parts: your primary or core gameplay loop, your secondary, and your tertiary. The primary gameplay loop is what you are doing on a second-to-second basis. What is the thing you are going to be spending the most time doing while you play the game? The secondary gameplay loop is your goal or motive for completing those tasks. This might be leveling up or completing a quest. And then the tertiary gameplay loop is the overall driving theme or narrative of the story. In practical but simple terms, this would be like Mario jumping and stomping on Koopas and Goombas as the primary gameplay loop, beating all the levels on one map to get to the castle as the secondary loop, all with the overarching goal of defeating all the Koopalings and saving the princess from Bowser as the tertiary loop. The trick is to make these loops affect each other on a macro and micro scale. That's good game design. The primary gameplay loop in Among Us is the list of tasks scattered around the map, or killing off people without others noticing. My misconception was that these tasks were easy and that would make the game boring, but in fact the opposite is true. Yes, the tasks are simple, but that plays to the game's favor as they're incredibly easy to understand and accomplish. This allows first-time players to integrate quickly, and it means the game is easy to pick up. Things like matching colors or symbols, or picking the odd one out are easy patterns that any person can figure out. Some of them are as simple as holding a button down for a long time. So great, the primary loop is easy. Navigate the map and do the thing. And yeah, it is easy. But how does counting to 10 not get really fucking boring? Well, that's because the secondary gameplay loop is directly tied to the first. The second loop is that the crewmates need to finish all their tasks before the imposter kills enough people. Everyone knows there is an imposter, and they know that voting will take place when someone reports a body. This means that while you're completing the tasks or the primary loop, you're also thinking about how to keep yourself safe and make sure other people know you're not the imposter. Which, by the way, are two directly opposing tasks because watching and being watched by others inherently makes you unsafe. You don't want to die, but you don't want to be voted out. Or, if you are the imposter, you want to kill people in a way that keeps you from being culpable. The fact that the tasks are boring and redundant is intentionally part of the game. You need to get them done regardless of how mind-numbing they are, and that makes them annoying when someone could kill you at any moment. Plus the fact that the task often takes up the whole screen, leaving you vulnerable to being killed if someone should sneak up on you while you're swiping a stupid card and it just won't fucking go. What do you mean? It's too fast! I can't go any slower! The concept is pretty easy to get into. One of us is a wolf in sheep's clothing, or astronaut suit. It's a pretty universal idea, but here's where this game gets weird because Among Us doesn't have a tertiary loop in the traditional way, and yet its secondary and tertiary loops are inherently connected. In a game like Among Us, the tertiary gameplay loop is usually something to do with gaining points or experience or money that is linked to how well you played the last round. This can then be spent on upgrading your character like in Hades, or on cosmetics like in Hades, or on progressing the overarching story like in Hades. Oh, I think I want to go play Hades. Among Us doesn't have any of that. There's no roguelike elements or character progression through game mechanics or narrative means. In fact, the tertiary gameplay loop in Among Us, that thing that keeps you coming back to play again and again, isn't even in the game, and it's a callback to the original design philosophy of Among Us, because Among Us isn't a video game, it's a board game. An electronic board game, but still a board game. And I don't mean electronic like Operation or fucking Perfection. During the secondary gameplay loop, players vote on who they think the imposter is. In the game, this can be done through text chat, but more commonly people are getting together through various online communication interfaces and video chatting as a whole party. The voting part of the game, the discussion and defense or accusation of actions that all took place within and were facilitated by the game, are now happening outside of the game. This is exactly the kind of discussion that one would see when families are torn apart during games like Monopoly. The difference is that arguing is encouraged by the game because that's how you make a case for yourself. But the game doesn't give you rules about how to argue. It doesn't say whose turn it is or if diplomacy is even necessary. All of that is left up to the players, which reminds me of the way I play Settlers of Catan. Give me that goddamn sheep, you slack-jawed troglodyte! But unlike Monopoly, rounds in Among Us are quite short, and when the game ends, you get to play again instead of getting a divorce. And it's easy to play again. The game puts you right back into the action and randomizes who the imposter is every time. So the tertiary loop of Among Us is the chance to hang out with your friends, just like you would when you're playing a board game. The secondary loop, the voting and trusting your friends, is often based on the actions of your friends within the primary loop, but also on the knowledge of your friends when placed in particular scenarios. The reason people keep coming back to play is simply because the game provides a fun, competitive, and underhanded activity of subterfuge and betrayal that is over within a few minutes and allows you the chance to laugh and connect with your friends outside of the game. To me, this is the pinnacle of what mobile games could be. Video games often bring people together, but it's rare that a video game brings people together and encourages real-world actions outside of the game. There are other games that do this, like Overcooked or Phasmophobia, but it's interesting that those games encourage co-op and communication as opposed to the cloak and dagger gameplay that Among Us facilitates. Through its incredibly intuitive concept, gameplay, and how the gameplay loops connect with each other and the outside world, Among Us has managed to become a hit by keeping people connected when that's been harder than ever. And that is why Among Us is the greatest and maybe only electronic board game. At least that I know of. I'm really glad that I gave this game a chance. I really enjoy arguing and being the imposter because I get to pass the blame on to someone else. That always made me feel really impressed with my own debating and logic skills. It was incredibly nice to be able to do something with Nate's family, even if it was just online. And I really like connecting with my friends while playing this game. I can totally see why this game does give people like Alyssa anxiety though. When you're the crewmate, everything feels threatening. I'm kind of super glad this game was not a horror game. Hey, thanks so much for watching that video. Sabotage that like button if you enjoyed it, and feel free to share it with all your friends. Let me know what you think about Among Us and your favorite way to play. You can always catch more awesome episodes of This Is a Thing, as well as some other really neat shows right here on Cinemaster's Ultimate Timeline.